The following content is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition.
Welcome to the Everyday Therapy Podcast. I'm Julianne Schroeder.
I'm Jacy, Rader.
And we're therapists and registered yoga teachers specializing in therapeutic yoga here at White Rock Counseling in Dallas.
Yes, and you can also find us online at whiterockcounseling.com. And we're... What else? Who are we? What are we doing?
We're getting our heads straight. But, we're thankful you're listening to the Everyday Therapy Podcast. We should probably tell everybody what we're about. And we really, our mission here is to share tips, stories, and inspiration to help with your overall emotional wellness and everyday therapy life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we are recently on iTunes, so please, please, please review, rate us, give us some feedback, subscribe. Adriana, you're required to. And yes, we'd really appreciate that. And we have a new sponsor. We told you about them last week, but we're super excited to tell you about them again. We have visited them and they're beautiful. So it's therapyspace.org. And it's basically a place where you can get your private practice started. You can rent rooms for an hourly rate, weekly, monthly. They have flexible plans to get you going. It's great for if you're starting private practice or kind of a veteran in the field. Mm-hmm. What else? You went and visited there more recently.
Yeah, no, what I loved about it too, I mean, it's really made by therapists for therapists, all supporting the work, right? And, healing work that needs to be done. So they try to make it easy for therapists in terms of, having all, everything set up as far as the waiting room.
It's super beautiful.
Yeah. With coffee and tea, that's important to me.
And it's affordable.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing. And I think they do offer different packages based on what you can.
How often you're renting the space.
Yeah.
So we love them and we support them as a company. So we appreciate them supporting us as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Therapy Space.
Yes. And we're so excited in honor of Veterans Day this weekend. We have a veteran here, which is so cool. Hi. So Adriana Speiker, she's an LPC, licensed professional counselor, and an LCDC?
LCDCI, yeah.
Okay, LCDCI, so licensed chemical dependency therapist?
Yeah.
Okay, all of our acronyms are confusing sometimes. But yes, So, and she is specifically also registered yoga teacher, so she works with Psychotherapeutic Yoga. Yep. But it's super cool because she was in the military for 9 years and was deployed twice. Yeah. Were you an officer?
I was enlisted. I finished my 9 years at Staff Sergeant.
Okay.
Ooh,
okay, I want
that's a big deal.
Yeah.
I can't wait to hear more about that. But anything else do you want to share about your professional background as far as in counseling?
I'm impressed you had all that memorized.
I know.
That was so good.
She was
love you.
rereading on the drive here. You got to do her right. I mean, you're a big deal. Yeah. Like, we are honored to have you. Literally. Really. Yeah. No, I did say that word. I'm like, she's a badass.
Because I'm like, is that, I am trying to remember my own background.
Yeah. Wait, who am I?
Yeah. So it is true. I was in the military for 9 years, psychological operations. deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan, 2 different deployments, and I got out of the military in 2012, and then went and got my master's in counseling in 2013.
So how long were you deployed each time?
A year each time.
Wow.
So I was a reserves soldier, so with that comes about half a year of training beforehand and about a month after when you come home.
Okay.
So it's a big commitment of time.
Yeah. What, a year and a half of your life? Basically?
At least a year and a half, yeah. And then
At
when
least.
you do it pretty much every other year, you end up feeling like you're deployed all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I was reading like the bio that you sent us, and it's so interesting because I've known you for 3 years, maybe even more.
Yeah.
For 3 years, and I don't know these like very important things about your military background. And we were talking before we started the podcast, and it was a little bit because I'm afraid to ask you.
Yeah. I think that it's surprising to me too, but I think it's something worth talking about and maybe getting the conversation started for other people in their own lives, that with Veteran Day coming up, or even over Memorial Day, it feels like some people don't know what to say, and that can even be off-putting to a veteran who does maybe want to share their story.
Yeah, because you can feel that tension from somebody else, that they're like nervous to talk about it.
And there are questions to avoid, like things to get, somebody who has been through trauma, and then you ask a question and it might be triggering. So it's definitely something to consider when talking to a veteran. But what I find to be most helpful is somebody's curiosity about my experience has never offended me, has never been anything that takes away from me in any way. And it actually gives me space to share what I want to share. Yeah. Instead of, the big ones that are asked that are kind of inappropriate are, have you ever killed anyone? Have you ever shot anyone? Or your own political views about their deployment. I don't believe in why you're over there or fighting, because for a soldier, that's not why. Yeah. We don't get a choice in where we deploy to. We don't really have political standings in the military. So it typically isn't even discussed within units. Political.
That's so helpful to hear. And like, I have heard that question being asked so many times and been curious myself to ask that. So I think it's super good to just hear, like, boldly don't ask that question.
Yeah, it isn't helpful to the veteran. It might, and things also that you're bringing up for your own benefit doesn't really help the veteran have space to share about theirs. Like when you come to a veteran and say, I would have joined the military, but I don't want to kill anyone. I would have joined the military, but I, got sick and my vision wasn't good or something, like it doesn't really help give them space to share in that, because they did give up certain freedoms in their own life to be a veteran or to be in the military. Sure. So I find those to be the most unhelpful in connecting with a veteran.
Yeah, and it seems like, of course, people are wanting to be respectful, but when you err on the side of being afraid to ask anything, that then almost conveys, well, I don't know if it conveys disrespect, but
it maybe devalues their experience, because it is to them something they lived through. Yeah. So to share it with other people in their lives gives them permission.
So can we talk about your personal experience? And it's so interesting because this is my first time hearing about it. So you were in the military for 9 years. How old were you when you first joined the military?
Yeah, I'm an odd case. So I actually was already in college when I enlisted, and typically people in college will go do the officer track. And in retrospect, I'm really glad I enlisted, because in my job, psychological operations, an enlisted soldier gets to do more. They get to actually do more of their job.
But you get to experience the ins and outs and nuts and bolts of it.
Yeah, to do like some of the face-to-face engagements that we did. Officers weren't really there. They were in the planning and strategic phases of it. So I got to actually do my job, which I really enjoyed. And that's one of the benefits for my 9 years there, was actually being a psychological operations soldier, and being on teams and running missions, and also being in different operational commands and doing a bigger view of psychological operations and the country wide. So I wouldn't have traded any of that in at all for choosing an officer's track. So I enlisted in college, and then I went to boot camp right after I finished college, and then I was deployed within a year or two after that. And I did trainings in South Korea right away as soon as I got back.
So you were in your early 20s.
I was in my early 20s. I was 22 when I enlisted, and then 23 when I finished boot camp. And then I got out when I was 30. Two.
Around there.
Yeah, around there.
Love when math comes out right now. Counselors.
Yeah.
It's like,
how old am I?
Yeah.
So from that experience, my first deployment was pretty quickly after I graduated college, and I went to Iraq for the first deployment, and I was an E4, E5, that's around sergeant level. And I was on missions, and I was also on media team, kind of doing informational processing in country at that time. So when I came back, I was dealing with some physiological changes in my body. And I made a decision before I left that everything that's going to happen over there is just I'm going to put into a box, and it's going to stay there. Sure. And I'm not going to bring it home with me. I'm leaving. I'm going to leave.
Sounds nice.
Yeah.
I knew I could do this. And I knew I could do it. I was going to leave this person.
You are strong-minded.
And come back this person.
Yeah.
And everything that happened over there was going to stay over there. And I was just going to come back and like hit the ground running, live my life, not lose any time after that.
Yeah.
Sure. Adriana, can I jump in and ask, I mean, this is such probably a loaded question.
Go for it.
But like, what was your day-to-day like over there? I mean, can you give us a picture of that?
Yeah. Day to day. So 6 months into my deployment, I changed from working on a media team to working actually on a patrol team, like working with PSYOP. It's called something different, but a 3-man team. So the first 6 months, day to day, I would wake up, and we have in Iraq and Afghanistan, they're called CHUs. They're housing units that are just these little trailers, and they're set up in little like communities. So I'd wake up, go to the separate unit that was the bathroom and deal with that, and then go
deal with it.
What are they, luxury accommodations is what you're saying?
Yeah,
you had your little mini spa morning.
Grab it's like college. Grab your little caboodle and go to the latrine, and then head in to work for the day. So then make it through the day. It would be anywhere from 10 to 12 hours that day, and then we didn't have a night shift there. So then it would be over, and we'd do all the media analysis for the day. I worked with about 7 interpreters. They were fantastic, Iraqi interpreters. And then I'm done for the day, sleep, wake up, do the same thing the next day. So it was pretty routine. There was no days off, and but I got night off. I could sleep. Sure. So I didn't realize what a benefit that was until later on in my career. But then when I was on the team, it kind of depended on the team, like what our missions plans were, talking with the units that we were there attached to. We'd run missions, and it was a lot more unpredictable. Certain bases I went to in Iraq, I was the first female to be on that base in northern Iraq. And so
what challenges did that bring?
It brought for me, it wasn't anything new to be the only female in certain places. What it did, certain things it just complicated. Like there was no latrine for females then. So we had to set up some sort of system or time for me to use the latrine so that I could shower and do any other things that I needed to do. And so that became uncomfortable at certain times. And then other bases I went to, it was very well set up, and accommodations were a little bit more comfortable. Also, certain areas in Iraq, I was the first American female to be there, and as my job entailed, I was part of the teams that would talk to the local population. So, and I really don't talk about that much. Sure. So, thanks for asking. That part of my experience was very rewarding. And it felt very much like I was actually making an impact in the area, it was just a double-edged sword, because as soon as you do that, you are starting to, be more there. And then leaving that area and coming back another time, it really didn't make an impact. Like you realize how much things just are affected by so many other factors as much as you try to help this one area.
Seems discouraging.
Yeah, then it's discouraging, hopeless. And I almost wish I didn't get my hopes up in that way. But I really did enjoy that part of my job. I had amazing counterparts that worked with me, and team members, interpreters. So it was, but it just was, and I would do patrols and stuff like that were very unpredictable, and things would happen in a moment. I was very lucky in certain convoys we did that certain vehicles were hit and mine wasn't. Like it was a continual, unpredictable environment that I was in. And it started to feel very normal for me that people around me wanted me dead. And that was a transition.
Wow. I'm like, I don't even know how to think about that. Right.
I mean, terrifying and scary, but your new normal now at this point.
At that point, that was just reality. So, and that was the reality I had told myself I'm going to put in this box and leave here when I leave.
Okay. How did that work when you got back?
So then when I returned, even walking, at that point my sister and I had purchased a home in our small town, and living there and taking a walk around the block, it felt unreal. Like it wasn't a reality that was comfortable for me anymore, because I was walking by myself. So you don't do that as a female in the military, and you don't do that if you are a U.S. soldier in another country. You always have, and they call it the buddy system. So it felt very uncomfortable for me to be on my own in a hometown I grew up in, walking down the street. I was still looking around, trying to see any threats. My nervous system, my breathing really shortened. I was ready at any moment to fight. And it felt uncomfortable with my brain, because my brain was telling me, you're safe. Enjoy this.
Yeah, such like an incongruence.
It was so incongruent. And so, naturally I chose the things available to me to deal with it, which a lot of soldiers do. They reach for what is available to them to deal with this hyper arousal in their body and their system, and the brain telling them that they're fine, that they're safe.
So the mind's telling you, like, we're in the safe place in Minnesota, right?
Yeah.
Okay, is where you
Minnesota? I didn't know that. You talk about Minnesota. I live there.
But your body is reacting in a way that, like, you're still in Iraq.
Yes.
So mind is in Minnesota, body's in Iraq still.
Yeah, and the mind kind of still is looking around for a threat. So it's still online with my training. But I just, people around me wouldn't have known that. They would have thought, she's home, she's safe, she's fine.
Sure.
But I was in constant alert. I was always ready to react. In order to fall asleep at night for the first couple months, I would drink a lot so that I wouldn't have to think.
Yeah. Is it okay if I ask, like, did the drinking escalate? Okay.
Yeah, it did. And that was something that worried me, and wasn't that, along with other people in my life, friends in my life, that told me, like one specific friend who said to me she just didn't think I was myself. She said I was being mean, and I was, and I wasn't being myself. And just with hearing her say that, knowing my own behaviors of the misuse of any chemicals in my life, because I had for such a long time been very aware of that because of childhood and growing up and being a teenager, so that I started to then see a therapist in our hometown.
Was that through the VA, or was it a private therapist?
And this is, my own personal experience of it, but I was scared to go to the VA because I was scared to tell anyone at my unit because of the, I'm missing the word here, the stigmatism of having any sort of mental health issue. I also knew that in a career in the military, if you wanted to continue to be promoted, if you wanted to keep working in your job, that would hinder you. So I knew all that, so I went to a private therapist.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And like paradoxically, that's so sad that you couldn't go to the VA, which is supposed to be a safe place for you to go to get help for this.
Yeah, or even to my unit. Yeah, when others were also
support.
Going through it. Yeah.
Can I ask if you think that others have that similar experience?
Yes, I do. Okay. And I know the military has set up that you take certain surveys when you come home. When you first come home from a deployment, you have certain tests you take to kind of gauge your mental health. And then a month after that, you have to take another test to kind of gauge how you're integrating. But these tests are very obvious for what they're asking. And if you're still in the military and you want to keep your career, you know how to answer them. And it's more about, it's more about, you know, you made it through that and you don't want to lose the career you're building.
And that kind of like cowboy mentality of, I've got this, you know, I can deal with this on my own.
And showing no weakness, because that also is part of the training that we go through just in basic training in boot camp, is to not show weakness and to show only your strengths. Because weakness is what people are going to hit you with. So I did see a talk therapist there for a couple sessions. He, in the mental health world, he used CBT. Which is cognitive behavioral therapy, which does not resonate with me very well. And that's fine.
You're talking to a therapist that was CBT trained in grad school. It's fine. No, I don't operate.
Great therapists out there. And that's also what I love about therapy is that you have so many varieties and modalities. But
CBT is more about like your cognitions and your actions and kind of like reframing things. It's very like direct. This is how we help you.
It's like seems a little bit more solution focused in a way, which I can imagine then if you've gone through a lot of trauma, you don't necessarily need a solution right away, but the space to share and for somebody to witness and say, oh, that's hard, and give you permission to be in that a little bit. I don't know. Tell me your experience.
Well, and my cognition wasn't off. It was, and my behavior was a little bit off, but my body was what was off, and that was most upsetting to me. Also, what triggered me to go to therapy was I had pulled my car over because I had been a driver on the last 6 months of my deployment in Iraq, and I had pulled over because I felt the desire to run another car off the road, which is so unlike me. That I was like, I can't live my life like this. I have to drive. I have to be in an environment that I don't see every car as a threat.
And talking about fight, flight, or freeze, being in that sympathetic nervous system, you're in fight all the time.
I'm in fight, and that, and I did want to talk a little bit about that, because I wouldn't say that's my tendency. That's not, and I know like in trauma counseling, it's, you know, you fight or flight until that's not an option, and then you freeze. I would probably think my option before my training would have been to run away, to get away, to get out of the situation, to not harm another person. But because of my training, it trains you to react in the desired way for your job. And as a driver, you're trained to fight, to be aggressive and use your weapon, which would be the vehicle. So it was in my training to do that. It was in my training, and it was in my muscle memory.
That's so interesting. I've never heard it put in that way before, that almost in a way it like retrained your neurobiology.
Yes. And I think that that's so important to have in common discussions with when considering any treatment for trauma with veterans or any reintegration when you come back from a deployment, or even when you leave the service, is to consider that you're not broken. We're not trying to fix you. But the things around you and the conditions that your behavior has become is what we want to look at and try to maybe either counter condition or look at new neural pathways, new ways of doing things.
Yeah, I like that. It's not, you know, going back to like the counselor mentality, it's not you, but it's the behavior.
Yeah.
And that's hard because there's probably a lot of shame with coming back and feeling so rageful or like wanting to numb with alcohol, drugs.
Other behaviors. Absolutely. So that therapist was very helpful to get me to a place of accepting that I needed help. He diagnosed me with the PTSD, which also was helpful because before then I felt like I was crazy. And I would say...
It's all in your head.
It's all in my head. And I was working so hard to hide it from the people in my life that loved me that I didn't have anyone to talk to because I wanted them...
It's so lonely.
Yeah, because I wanted them to believe I was okay because I could see my time away had also hurt them. And I could also see, I wanted my theory to work. That box theory, I wanted it to have worked. So I didn't want to say, no, I have this stuff in my life I'm dealing with. I brought some of it home. He didn't want to admit that. So I think that's also why his diagnosis and talking to me about it helped. But then it started not helping, and I decided to stop going to talk therapy and just deal with other, the next phase in my life, which ended up being another deployment. So.
Okay.
Which is very, very common for veterans and for military to be deployed again, even before. I had a year off. I had time in between, but it's hard. And then you go into the next deployment, and you haven't really dealt with certain things from the first deployment. So they start to compound. So the second deployment happened, and it was Afghanistan, and I was in Kabul, which was Strategic Operational Command is kind of where I worked, and I worked in a 24-hour watch there. I was the psychological operations liaison for the country. So it was a 24-hour watch. A lot of stuff happened throughout that year, but what ended up happening was that I was the only one doing that job towards the mid to end of the year. So there's a lot of stress.
Going back to the not sleeping,
so
24 hours on.
Feeling guilty to sleep or eat because nobody was at the 24-hour watch. And not taking care of myself. That was a very common thing there. I wasn't the only one that had that issue. And then there was, and I think a lot of people in my life during that time, on base and also at home, very supportive people in my life. I'm very lucky. And I try to tell them enough, but this is reminding me, maybe I should reach out again and let them know.
It's hard to remember that sometimes, for sure.
They really helped me through some hard times. And there was a civilian there. I'm going to give a shout out to her, Lexi. Her and I started doing yoga together, and she did one day and I did one day a week. But she really was the driving force in getting me to teach it. I taught Sundays before my shift started on the desk. And
you taught to other
at the MWR, which is basically like a gym on base.
Okay.
And at the MWR, basically I honestly just led yoga. It was like if I watched a video and I just
you would just say the same thing.
Robotically followed what they said. And then I was not a teacher. I'm not the teacher I am today, for sure. But
you have to start somewhere.
I totally, and it was, why not there? It was the population there, the soldiers that came in and civilians that came in to take my yoga class were so forgiving and embracing. And, I saw 3-star general in warrior pose struggling. I saw, staff sergeants doing certain poses out of breath, forgetting to breathe, very tight muscles from the, bodybuilders are the ones doing a lot of weights. It was a gym, so we also had wrestlers over to the side, people on bikes over there. It was probably for me the best experience on the deployment. It held no negativity to it. It actually helped me have space and time within that deployment that I could have myself. I didn't have to be a staff sergeant. I didn't have to be a liaison. I didn't have to be a daughter. I didn't have to be anything to anyone else. I just had to be there. And
how relieving.
Yeah, it was. And that's why I think, and I had that in Iraq as well, but it was my own personal practice of yoga because it was introduced to me when I was in college in one of my psychology courses.
Okay.
So I think you talked about that in a previous podcast.
Yeah. One of my first, that's how I was introduced to it too. And it's funny because I hated it. Whenever I took this class, it's not for me.
I loved it.
Okay, that's good though.
It was a Kundalini class, and it was called Personal Development was the course. And since then, yoga has always been a part of my life, but it hasn't been a big role. I just enjoyed it, and when I got back from Afghanistan, Lexi and I went to a warriors yoga class training, and that kind of sparked for me. And then I took my own teacher training in Guatemala. And got alignment, yoga trained, and then came back to Minnesota, and I would do teachings at the local community center for free, and it just really helped. I think that helped me more on my deployment back and getting my body back in line with my mind and coming back in a more natural way than with Iraq.
Okay.
And my experience in Afghanistan was different, so there's that too.
Okay. Yeah. So
I wasn't in combat missions in Afghanistan.
Okay, so there was a totally different feel to Afghanistan for you.
Yes. Yeah.
So I'm curious, in like going into talking about trauma in general and like how the mind and body works, can you talk a little bit about how you explain trauma? Because I know you talk to veterans a lot about trauma.
Yeah.
Like, what do you say to them? How do you explain it?
Yeah. So I talk to them, and we talked a little bit about it earlier, is that what's different from trauma with a veteran who's been in combat or with anyone who has been through a traumatic event, like in their own home or in their own country, it's different is that veterans are trained to work within the nervous system of the fight, flight, or freeze.
So they use that.
So they use that in their training to then perform. So that's what difference is, the stuck position when stress becomes too much and you become stuck in that reaction of fight, flight, or freeze. The body hasn't released it. And I feel, populations like police, firefighters, they all have that experience as well. But the difference is good or bad or hard or easy, they come home at the end of the day. They have support systems that see them through that. Military, even if they're active duty or reservists, leave their family in training to do it, and then leave their family and home and what they know to go to another country. So they don't have the support system. It's not accessible to them in the same way.
Right.
And as much as people can email, phone calls, you do need the closeness and connection to another person to kind of feel the support. It's a part of healing. Right. It's definitely a part of trauma care.
Sure. Right. Like I thought I came across some stat that just being in the comforting presence of somebody loving, going through a painful experience, like can bring down cortisol levels by like 50% or something like that. Yeah. Right. So just, while I can assume like that your colleagues, I don't know the
fellow veteran.
Fellow veteran. Oh my gosh. Sorry.
I wouldn't know either.
Wow. Okay. All right. On that. Anyways, like you can get support from them. There's something different, right, about a dynamic with non-veterans.
Yes, there is, and I think, and it's a very good point because that is, even if your system's out of alignment with itself and with the environment around it, we all have connection to people in our area, in like proximity. So that can go both ways. So as much as a person who has a very calming presence as a partner in a relationship, and the other one who's activated, it can calm down the activated person. It can also activate the calm person. So then you have two people dealing, one who's maybe dealing with the PTSD and the other one who's dealing with the symptoms of the PTSD in their life. And not everyone that deploys has PTSD.
Thank you for saying that. I think that that's kind of an assumption that people that go to combat, they have PTSD, but there's a time period after you get back. What is it? 3 months is acute stress?
3 to 6 months.
3 to 6 months.
And you really don't get the diagnosis or the symptoms of PTSD until like 9 to 12 months. And, veterans, Vietnam veterans and others, are further out, years even, you start to get the symptoms.
Delayed
flashbacks.
Sure.
Because of a trigger or because of something that happens in their life that their stability's lost. And then the old neural pathways come back up and they're in full force.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I think you illustrated some symptoms based on your story, which once again, thank you for sharing. But for our listeners, what do veterans need to be looking out for in terms of identifying like when it comes, becomes into like too much, and like what should supporters look out for?
Yeah, I think part of being a veteran and dealing with the reality of deployments and military service and losing a lot of your freedoms just by enlisting or being a part of the military is this ability in your system to be hyper aroused and hyper vigilant. And in your job, a lot of times a hypervigilance is an asset.
Yeah,
so
it's necessary. And
it's necessary. It's part of your survival in that job and in that environment.
We use that term a lot in counseling. Can we just explain that a little bit, what hypervigilant and hyperarousal is?
Right. I use them interchangeably. So hypervigilance in the military is highly sought after. It is something that you want and you want to keep. So it's being aware of your surroundings, noting everything around you, situational awareness, And then having your system, your body system, be alert and aware. So not tired, not drowsy, not calm.
Always on.
Always on.
Yeah.
Always having, your eyes are always looking around. You know where the exits are. You know how to get out of any situation or building or environment. Where's your safe spot? Where is cover? Those are always on your mind, and your body will react before your mind does because of the training.
It's like a reflex.
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah.
In a way.
Yeah. So coming back to everyday life, how that would look like for a veteran, maybe
that car that cuts you off is now a threat to you. So that's my own personal example. But what it could be, another struggle I had was people in my life that loved me I felt they didn't know me, and I couldn't trust them anymore. So trust, because that was the condition I was also in.
Yeah, you couldn't trust anyone.
And I'll, throw it out there, as a female in the military as well. I couldn't really trust anyone. I always had to keep a guard up. And through training, I learned that as well. Like it wasn't a part of the schedule or plan, but it definitely taught me as a female to keep my guard up. I can't trust the senior commander. I can't trust my buddy. I'm the only one who's going to take care of me.
You have to have a certain amount of walls up at all times.
And to learn that lesson over multiple situations, you learn them.
Yeah.
You don't make that mistake again in that environment. But then when you come home and you do have people you can trust, it's still there.
Yeah. Sure. You don't just go back into like, oh, okay, I can trust my partner or my friends, my family.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when you say that, like, we get not trusting, but what did that look like? Did you not, besides not like discussing like your internal experience, did you close yourself off from just like everyday interactions with them?
Yeah.
Or
so that's what I would look for as a supporter of a veteran or somebody in a life, sharing a life, if that veteran starts to isolate.
Okay.
Because of that. And many other reasons they might isolate because of threat as well. But if they're no longer enjoying time out with their friends and they're isolating because of that, because other people stimulate their system, that's a good warning that something else is going on for them.
Yeah.
Okay.
And also, as therapists, we know isolation leads to a lot.
Depression, anxiety, all types of mental health issues.
Without an ability to counter it. So
yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different factors and layers. And just thinking about like trauma in general, so not even just with veterans, it's similar in some ways.
In a lot of ways, yeah.
And then different in other ways. But even on like the biological level of like trauma in a way impacts your physiological response system, that parasympathetic, sympathetic nervous system. And so you're always in that heightened awareness, it seems like.
Yeah, it absolutely. And I think I also just want to say, like, this is also a complex issue and individualized. So my story is not going to fit other people's stories. There might be pieces to it. And also my recommendations are very much to be taken into consideration, but with the other person, their characteristics and how because a lot of this, no one enlists in the military, no one joins the military with no history.
Yeah, you bring your own baggage.
You bring your own baggage
everywhere.
And trauma. Yeah.
And some might roll theirs around.
There may already be trauma in that.
Yeah.
So to just give a blanket statement would do that person a very big disservice. So, but to answer your question on, remind me again. I had a good answer for it.
Well,
what to look out for?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was just saying that trauma can look very similar for all different types of traumatic experiences.
Yes, yes. So
on a physiological level,
look for the same trauma responses that you would see in anyone else would be that hyperarousal, the senses of feeling like everyone's against them, being on guard at all times. A big one with the military, but you'll see it in trauma populations as well, is explosions of anger and hostility.
Which makes sense for everything that you've been talking about.
And with this also being, you didn't know it was coming because they're so well trained.
Yeah.
their exterior can look so calm and maybe with it, and then all of a sudden it's an explosion into anger and hostility, but it's because their system's already at a fight, flight, or freeze response.
You're already heightened.
Yeah.
So
that emotional eruption is going to happen.
It's going to happen fast.
Fast and before you know it.
Right. Like there's not going to be a lot of awareness of it coming.
Whereas other people, there may.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, so how do you work with that?
Yeah. What is
I love working with that. I love
path to healing.
Yeah. So it's complex and individualized. Now that I've said that, moving on. And this is the part I felt I experienced unplanned, is getting into the body and moving with the body, getting the brain to be with the body in a safe environment.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because not to me, but I feel like to some people, using the body can kind of feel a little woo-woo in a way. Yeah. But how does that connect? Yeah.
So I don't. Obviously, for me, it's yoga, and I know for the two of you, it's yoga as well. But it doesn't have to be. So with veterans, for whatever helps them is going to help them get into their body. That's important. So it doesn't have to be woo-woo. It can just be. Different types of activity you do that include breath, movement, and mindfulness. And the mindfulness for me in this type of treatment would be in the moment, present moment focus. So you're not thinking about what's going to be coming when this event is done or what just happened. You're in the moment experiencing it. So whatever draws you into that, which yoga is a great example of that.
Yeah. There's a lot of focus on that.
There's focus on the present moment. There's focus on the breath, and the breath becomes the cue into the movement. Sure. So it's ready-made, it's packaged, it's ready to go.
Yeah, you love your boxes.
Your packages.
You found your package.
I did. It came in a nice little mandala-shaped box. But for other people, it might be running, and that's fine because there's breath, there's movement, and present moment. So the key with running would be to get them to focus on the body in the run instead of focusing on a problem or an issue or something that they're going to do after the run. It would be to get them into the moment in the run, physical body. How are your feet feeling in your shoes, meeting the pavement or the trail? How does it feel to be, in the body again in a safe place?
Sure. Because it's about having those felt experiences of safety, right? And building on them.
Because it's going to counter the experience for the military. It's going to counter the experience you had in the felt experience, training yourself to be in fight. So you need to counter that. You need to get yourself back into your body.
That's a lot of countering.
Because it's a lot of countering, but it was there before, so you can get it back. Yeah. And it's just more options. You want to give yourself and your brain more options. And your body has so much information for you. It's your instincts, it's your gut reaction that soldiers count on to save their lives. So I get back in contact and trusting that gut reaction would be the first place to start with any veteran, any military personnel, active duty or otherwise,
and
that
anybody
are working
with trauma.
Anyone, it is basically what I do with trauma, any trauma. I just get them first into their body, get them moving, get them into an experience of feeling safe. But so for veterans, we come into it with education. I talk about the, training to get you into the fight response in your body. And then we need to come back into allowing calmness, allowing
I'm sure
peace.
That's so normalizing to hear that, especially from you, but to hear how that experience makes sense, in their physiology, in their brain, in their mind, because they're feeling that way.
Yeah, they're feeling that way. I hope so. I hope it is, because I never heard it.
Yeah.
But once I started to see it and see, okay, I'm not crazy, then it made sense. Then I didn't have to pretend to be outside of a different system. I didn't have to pretend to be okay. I could let myself be where I'm at and then gradually get to a place of being okay. And that's kind of you move through that, getting into your body, noticing your body, noticing that you have control over your body and your mind, and that you can come back into being the manager of it and regulating it, that we use in psychology. And then the final phase for trauma that I think is a real, and it's all secular, it comes back around, and we, it's always going to be something to be dealt with and be conscious of. But the final one is connection, and connection to other veterans, connection to family members, connections to other people in your field, having connectivity, being able to allow somebody to be close to you again, it can be very much a healing process for someone with a trauma body and trauma response. But also just sitting in a room with other people and noticing how they're feeling and how you're feeling, and that you don't have, what they're feeling, you don't have to pick up, and what, you know, they're feeling, it doesn't have, but you can feel it, and that you can have connection with any one person.
It's like a true, genuine intimacy, like connecting back to that. You had that before you left. You couldn't have that while you were gone or going through a trauma. But you can give yourself permission to have that now, once you build that safety and trust back.
And that's really where the recovery from trauma is more solidified, and is because without connectivity, our system will just go back.
I'm not meant to be alone. No, and go through hard things alone. So on that note, it seems like a big part of this healing process is to feel safe, right? And to reach out. And so I know that we wanted to share resources, like locally, and you know, for veterans as well as supporters.
Yeah. So honestly, so the VA, I've been through the VA. I talked about why I didn't go when I was actually in the military, but the VA is pretty important for being able to provide help to veterans. And it does the best job it can. I would say to any veteran, don't give up on the VA, keep going, get the help you need. It is there, it's getting better. It has gotten better for me. I have, you know, a lot of experience. I've been through the VA in Minneapolis, Chicago, and Fort Worth, and Dallas. And they're not all the same, but to just keep going and getting the help you need. And also they provide you with resources outside of the VA if you need help. In most communities, a lot of people will give veterans discounts for mental health. There is, you know, one source. The military itself has they have a behavioral health center in most bases. Just being able to know the resources are there, and that you have every right to access them and get the help you need.
Yeah.
And it's not because you're weak.
No.
It's because that's how trauma works.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. You need that support
Yes.
in order to move through it.
Yeah. And I did want to, one thing, I think this was what I was thinking earlier, that I kind of lost my train of thought, is the difference between a combat trauma and any other trauma that walks into my office or that I have dealt with is, you know, everything else we talked about is pretty similar. People who have been abused, who's been through a life-changing event or had shock in their system or their life, they're going to experience pretty similar things that a veteran experiences. The difference that I've seen is a humanity level. Veterans face tragedy. They face war. They face things that really humans shouldn't be facing. And then they come home and they can't forget them. And they had to perform and do jobs in those certain situations. So there's a loss of humanity. There's a little bit of grief in that. There's realizing that primal part of themselves that's still there, that came back with them, and that it's not about digressing or moving back and acknowledging it. It's just a part of them that's there now, and that they can evolve and help through the healing as well. That they're not broken, and that it's not something that is damaged that they can't get back from. It's just that level of humanity. They describe themselves as monsters, as primal, as all these things that they know as educated beings they're not. And I agree. But that's something I don't really see in other populations.
That makes sense.
Yeah, the environment. Right?
Yeah, the loneliness of coming back and nobody else, or feeling like nobody else really has that experience.
And the fear of the people you love seeing that part of you.
Sure. But you're a walking testament to how like healing and hope is, you know, possible. And now you're helping others.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, just thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you guys for having me here and talking about it.
Yeah.
Because I guess I didn't realize what a taboo topic it was.
Yeah.
And I appreciate just the open conversation then to have about it.
For sure. Yeah. And I think it's, you know, with anything like we were talking about before the show started, of like even a death. And I loved what you said at the beginning of just going about anything with a curiosity mindset.
Yeah.
And that allows somebody space to talk about what they need to talk about.
Yeah.
So, we hope that, you know, listeners or whoever's listening to this can give other people space, or know that they have the space to talk about difficult things.
Yeah.
So,
and with any trauma populations and veterans, like triggers are going to happen. That's okay. That's part of the process. I mean, people get triggered even without traumas. Yeah. But that curiosity will help you come to that person in an open way too. Yeah.
Yeah.
And for themselves to start to be curious.
I like what you said earlier, and just to come back to that of like, it does seem like it can come back up for you, and then you have to deal with it again. Yeah. It might not be as hard the second time. You kind of know your tools and all of that.
You have more options. You have choices within it.
Yeah, like a work in progress.
Absolutely.
In a way.
Yeah, but it gets better.
Yeah, it's evolving. It's evolving. It's not, and that's something I like to look at with trauma of anyone. It's evolving. Like, this doesn't stop you from living your life. You have to keep going and evolving and with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well,
on
that note,
is there, before we'd love for you to, tell listeners where they can find you and all that, is there anything going into Veterans Day weekend as far as things, to hear appreciation is helpful, I assume? What else?
Yeah, I do. I have no qualms at all with people saying thank you for your service.
Yeah.
I know some veterans apparently do. I haven't heard of it from a veteran that they don't like that, but some might feel like I did my job. I don't need you to thank me. That might be an option. I don't mind it. I thank people for their support if they say it, because they obviously, nobody, I feel in the United States and in other countries as well, don't have somebody who's been in the military, have some part of their life been affected by a military or a military action. So I just appreciate that general support. And then going into Veterans Day, besides saying thank you for your support, maybe a loved one you have in your life that you just ask, like, I'm curious about this, or, why did you join? What, how has it been for you since being back? And, what ways can I be there to help and support you, or tell me a story?
I love that. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you so much for being on and sharing your experience and how others can, heal or just have more information in general. I think that's our goal.
Thank you, ladies.
Yeah, but if they want to heal with you, because you're a freaking badass and help so many people, where can they find you?
So I'm in Fort Worth at LifeWorks, so Lifeology. The website is wefixbrains.com. I work primarily in trauma but I also work with veterans. I am EMDR trained. I do psychotherapeutic yoga. I really like to learn about where you're at now and see how trauma is affecting you now, and then work from there. Because I don't need to go back and discover anything that you've already moved from.
Sure.
Yeah.
Cool. I like that.
Yeah. And the whole person.
Yes.
I work with the whole person.
Yes. Yeah. Of course. Yes,
cool.
Yes.
It's such an easy website, and we've talked about it the last few episodes. wefixbrains.com.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you, Ziggy, for flashing that up.
We're so fancy and technologically advanced here.
Yeah. Thanks to Ziggy.
Thanks to Ziggy. But please go to iTunes and rate and review us.
Yeah.
It would be so nice, and we'll love you forever.
And I know, just speaking for me, like, I get overwhelmed. I have to craft the perfect response, even if you were to be like, this is awesome, or
I hate this. Don't ever say that.
No. Yeah, like, please don't.
You can.
I mean, I guess.
Yeah.
Anyways, it's short and sweet. Right.
But thank you to all of our veterans. Hopefully we have some of them listening.
Yeah.
And thank you to Adriana. And we'll see y'all next week.
Yay.